Good evening and welcome. Let's take a look at the big story we are tracking for you this hour. Beirut has turned into a war zone. Army tanks have rolled into the city and deadly gunfire exchanges are underway. Ambulance sirens are wailing across the city and evacuations are being carried out by police and civilians. Just an hour ago, gunshots were fired at protesters demonstrating outside the city's Palace of Justice. Gunshots were seen coming out of rooftops of the nearby buildings. Snipers were reported on the top floors of high-rises along the streets. Now, this is Beirut's Telene neighborhood. It's a Shiite suburb, and the Interior Minister, Bassam Maulawi, has confirmed that 6 people have been killed, all of them by gunshots. And the Lebanese Red Cross put the number wounded at 30. Several loud bangs were heard in the area, likely from heavy shelling. Now, plumes of black smoke were rising from an apparent fire. Fire was seen raging from shops, vehicles and buildings. The residents cowered in corridors away from the windows as some were shattered by the gunfire. Now, some scurried outside, running towards ambulances as civil defense volunteers tried to evacuate civilians, including young children. People were caught stranded and terrified on the streets, running to find their acquaintances. Civilians were seen helping each other to find safe shelter away from the gunfire exchanges between the army and the unknown attackers.
Everything started this morning, and as you can see, the motion is somehow normal now. Ambulances have rushed and are still rushing to the area where the protesters were shot at this morning. The square, the Tayuni Square, is actually in the end of the street, but as you can see, the motion is normal here. As this continues to uncover, the political deadlock is also escalating into a standoff between the judge, between Hezbollah and anti-Hezbollah, between the world and the political deadlock that is happening in the country.
A limp body was seen lying on a main street after the attacks. It was soon carried away by rescuers as gunfire rained around them. As soon as the attacks were reported, the army was deployed to the Shiite neighborhood of the city. Tanks rolled into the suburbs and the evacuations began. The army started firing at the suspected buildings, which were reported to be the source of the gunshots. They warned the residents to steer clear of the buildings and started raiding them one by one. Now, these are scenes from earlier today. Nearly 200 protesters had gathered outside the Palace of Justice to protest against the lead judge investigating the 2020 port blast. Now, the protesters were called by the Hezbollah group and their allies. Now, these investigations into the 2020 post-blast have been stalled several times earlier.
A standoff between the judge investigating the disastrous Beirut port blast and top politicians has roiled Lebanon's cabinet and escalated to the streets. Don't be fooled by the normal motion behind me as I speak. This is not unusual in Lebanon, but on the other street, there's been gunfire, rocket RPG, and other clashes, and they're still ongoing. The Lebanese army is trying to control the streets after arms were shot at protesters this morning at Tayuni Square. This square is on the road leading to the court where pro-Hezbollah protesters were headed today. This has left Lebanon in a political deadlock after the financial collapse and now in a high security civil unrest.
WION, now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.